Okay, back for part two, punters. We're going to start off with some queries from Michael. Love the new show, guys. I wanted to ask about 3 winning performances from last week and how they measure up on par times from ratings to win. The first horse was at Scone on Tuesday, Flocky, whatever name you might want to assign. Michael, essentially I can tell you that it was a maiden race. Obviously it won by 8.3 lengths. The inside section of the track that day was compromised. The horse did sit wide in run and came down the centre of the track, so it was obviously aided by that. Mind you, the winning margin was obviously very convincing. Being wide that day wasn't really a disadvantage, so you wouldn't want to be looking at that performance thinking, oh, I'm going to tack something onto it for being wide.
From a track perspective, yeah.
From a track perspective. Look, they went about 5 lengths better than what you'd expect a maiden race to go, so they ran pretty good time. 2 lengths better than the track, what I would call the track pass, so your average race at Scone, which is not a bad performance
in a maiden.
So that's my take on that. Obviously it showed a number of key attributes that were good, and from a race watcher's point of view, John, you want to...
Well, that's kind of more of my angle to that. So like when you're looking at an 8.3 margin, straight away you've got to be negative mentally. Like you've got to go into it not wanting to be too positive about this horse because everyone's seeing an 8.3 margin. So it's more about usually picking holes in it and really wanting...
Would it be?
Yeah, that's right. So is the time right? Did it do anything? Are the horses behind any good? Was there a massive bias that aided it? You've really got to go in with a negative approach to this horse to pick the 8.3 apart. I especially something, even anything, 2, 3, 4, 5, any big margin winner, you want to be trying to pick them apart. This horse particularly it showed good speed, which is an important factor.
Yep.
Drew wide, obviously wasn't going to cross. He's grabbed hold, caught wide, no cover. 1,000 metres, it's not diabolical. It would have been if the fence was an advantage this day. Obviously the fence was off, so it wasn't as bad. But it still has sort of worked without cover, which is a positive, regardless of how the track was playing. It's shown really good acceleration. It has sort of done something that nothing else in the race did, even though it may have been in the best part of the track. And it has raced away and put a margin on them strong to the line. So it's done a lot of good things, but as you could say a +5 or whatever you give is a really strong time rating or whatever you want to call it. Overall rating.
Well, I think that's what Michael's saying is how does it compare against times? Obviously these times are adjusted, Michael, for what we call track speed, which is basically the percentage of, in simple terms, how fast or slow the track raced on the day compared to an unaffected good tree surface.
So that's a good, like you won't see many, I don't see many ratings that will get near 8.3. So that's a pretty strong time performance from you, from your system. Everyone's seen 8.3. It's not a horse I want to be negative about because it's done everything right. The only thing is that the track was aiding it. I know it's going to a Class 1 at Muswellbrook next start, so we'll see more then.
Now, is it going to be unbackable?
Well,
in your opinion?
I would say I've been pretty neutral. It'll probably be slightly overplayed, but people will factor in that it was okay down the outside and that may have assisted. So I don't think, like say it comes up $1.60, if it was everything, it was a normal Class 1 and it all worked out, I'd say I'd have it priced pretty close to what it comes up. I don't think the market's going to overplay it too much because there was a lot of merit in it. Maybe slightly, say it might be $1.60, I might have it $1.90 or something. I'm probably not looking to back it.
Yeah,
but it's got plenty behind it. Yeah, I don't want to risk it because it's got upside and it's got a lot of positive attributes.
Also, just on those horses that win maidens and then go to the Class 1, Class 2, whatever it is next start, one thing the market might often do is overplay it early, but late in the bet.
When the real serious,
money comes in, that class rise, that old maiden to Class 1.
It's a huge factor in a lot of big syndicates sort of pricing and
in their algorithms.
Yeah.
So expect the horse if you're going to back a horse like that. Don't charge in early morning prices. Wait, be patient. Often you'll get a better price late in betting.
100%, regardless of it usually will blow no matter what, and if it's the superstar or whatever, it'll tend to firm again really late. So it'll blow at some point in the market.
Yeah. Okay. Next horse was Kembla on Thursday.
Kokapoo.
Yep.
Yeah.
Look,
superstar Josh Parr riding.
Okay. What have I got here? Okay, so 1 by 5. The track that day John, what did you think?
The fence was very strong. It was definitely on pace, and the fence was a big advantage. Like it was definitely an advantage on pace and fence.
They've got about 3.5 lengths above, what you'd expect for that class of race, the BM65 open age race. About 3.5 lengths on the actual track par. So good performance, certainly big margin again. The only thing I've noticed about that result is that the last 200, when the horse really looked like it was powering away from them, actually ran subpar, ran about 3 lengths below par. So it was accelerating away visually, but factually it was actually decelerating, and the other horses were just decelerating at a much faster rate.
Yeah, there was one horse really held up, Gracious Grey, which just basically went to the line untested, which would have definitely cut into the margin.
Yep.
And I think there was about a 7-2 chance that tailed off. So there were a couple of negatives that could take away from the quality and the margin too. So it's again done some good things. It's shown some good speed, accelerated away from them, took advantage of the bias, which was definitely there. So there's a lot of things that went into why it won by so far, but it has shown. So it's another horse that I don't want to be seriously negative about, but I think it will be overplayed due to a few issues, and it's another horse that probably will blow late, but I expect it to open up pretty short. I think it's going up in grade. It's going to Canterbury next Wednesday. I think it's about a mile. I think it's a mile again. I think it was 1,500 or 16. Yeah. So I think it's going to a mile, 1,550 next Wednesday at Canterbury.
How do you feel about the horse going up in distance? I'm just a little bit concerned.
Yeah, I don't think it's probably an adaptable horse. So it can probably just sit in behind and it doesn't seem to have any negative racing sort of issues. Doesn't get race fiercely or anything. So I wouldn't be too worried about it. And it's obviously in a bit of a purple patch.
And Canterbury too.
Put some big margins on a country race, then gone and done it at the provincials. Yeah. Obviously things in its favour, but it's still run good time and some good things. So it's because it's going up in grade, I'd probably the market won't hammer it as much as if it was staying in provincial grade. Sure. So it's another one that's fairly neutral, probably a little bit more negative than the other one.
Okay, the third horse is Francisca.
Yes.
So Francisca basically went about 2.5 lengths above what you'd expect for a Class 2 fillies and mares open age race. About 3 lengths above what you would expect at the Sunshine Coast. But the important thing to note about this particular race was it was a $20,000 race held at the Sunshine Coast. So it was essentially a metropolitan midweek event. So if you actually recalibrated on that basis, it actually went around 1.5 lengths below what you'd expect typical for a metropolitan type par.
Yep.
And that's one way to actually dissect this.
Yeah, I missed that, so that's good. Yeah, that's good. I'm not a Sunshine Coast person by any Matt, but that's a big difference.
Yeah,
obviously, it's a 4-length difference.
It's your metro.
Yes.
Your metro track, but essentially metropolitan race.
Yes.
Sorry, metropolitan race.
Yes, at a provincial
track.
Yes.
Came in the better part of the track. The inside was just a little bit off that day. A lot of horses were sticking towards that inside section, so that perhaps augurs well for them next time, more so than this horse.
Yes.
So I'd be just a little bit dubious of that. And I'd be sort of tacking on today's performances towards the inside and perhaps just taking off a little bit on this horse. But look, didn't do too bad a job. Overall, acceptable. But
another positive from a time split, or fairly positive. Yeah. Obviously, depends how you look at it. If you're looking at a provincial or a metro, it's a big difference.
For me, I'm just a little bit concerned about it. I'd much favour the other two.
Yeah, well, the only thing I thought was interesting was this horse sort of when 1100 got back its first start and got beaten by that horse, Too Easy Bro, nice enough horse, city class. 1400 the start after it, sort of at the beginning it got shuffled a little bit, held up, had a lot of trouble and won. Then this day it sort of jumped nearly in front and he's actually forcibly restrained it out the back. It was widest with no cover, which might not have been too bad. And then so that they're the positives for the horse for mine, that it could race closer. There's no doubt about that. But the problem is that it's got the track into the race at the time. It's got to the right part. They're all bunched when it's gone past everything.
Yeah.
And there were horses held up. So there's big positives and negatives for this horse. And you can go either way. If it draws a gate next time or finds a race with less speed, I could easily see it racing, or even if it goes up to a mile, because it does look like it's a fairly strong type. It could improve through its race style. But there are negatives about how it won that race so easily.
On balance, probably more negatives than positives.
Definitely, unless things, unless it gets an idea to set up next time where it can race closer.
Yeah.
and show a bit more tactical speed, then it could be a lot more positive horse. But at the moment, absolutely, where it's been racing its last few starts, the other two horses have got much more control over their future than Franciscus does. If it goes to Doomben and draws a wide gate and the fence is good or something, it's in a lot of trouble.
Michael, great ones there that you've picked out. Thank you very much for that. The next one is from Mick. Just a list of bets that I had last week. Mick, I won't read all these out, there's a lot of them, but essentially it says here, I know some of my bets are inconsistent, but I get excited about roughies and are just starting to bet on shorter priced horses because that seems to be the way the professionals do it, but I find it hard to adjust my ways. My way, I do have a long losing runs and I do lose confidence in my system, but find that I rather make a mistake on a roughie than a favourite. Favourites seem to lose a lot more of my bank a lot quicker on a bad run. Any suggestions must appreciate it. Okay, I've just gone through and had a look at your staking on each of those. There are some inconsistencies there in terms of what you're rated a horse, because that seems to be the way you're staking your bank versus what you've actually done. I think you can pick out those for yourself. I won't go into that unless you want me to. If you want some more detail on that, feel free to contact me. But essentially, I think the first thing you need to do, Mick, is work out what your risk threshold is. Like you talk about losing confidence during a bad run. It doesn't matter whether your strike rate's 20% or whether your strike rate's 50%. You're still going to have losing runs. You're still going to have situations whereby you're going to have drawdown on your capital. The drawdown that you experience on longer priced horses by virtue of their implied probabilities based on their odds means that you're going to lose a lot more of your bank in a bad run than what you would, say, backing on shorter priced horses where you're
So it's the reverse of how he's finding it at the moment.
It's the reverse of actually what you're finding it. So yes, you're right. On any individual bet, you may well lose more on backing than backing a horse at 4 to 1. But the reality is that you're going to find it much more difficult to profit long term backing horses at 10 or 15 or
unless your system's flawed, that's right, for whatever reason, and you're not pricing up the favourites correctly for whatever reason. You might be underplaying over something, I don't know. That's the only... If you're finding the right roughies but not finding the right favourites, there may be an issue in
the distribution that you're applying to the market. Even if you forget about rating horses yourself and trying to put a market price on, and you just accept that the market price is close to being
correct, like come to race, SP or whatever,
you're still better off concentrating from a turnover perspective on those horses, and also a mindset. And very important not to discount that, because if you're backing horses at 2 to 1, you're going to lose roughly 6.7 out of 10. If you're backing horses at 10 to 1, you're going to lose, obviously, as the odds imply, roughly 90% of the time.
Yes.
So you're going to have that feeling of losing consistently, and that's very damaging to your mindset as a punter. And it doesn't matter how good you are as a form analyst.
Yes.
If you're backing those types of horses, that's not to say that we don't back those horses. We do. I mean, I back.
No, I'm probably worse than
you're probably wider.
Yeah.
In terms of your approach, but thinking about what I said before about that favourite long shot bias, essentially, if you take a horse at $1.50, from the research that I've done, they win pretty much as $1.50 chances. So there's no advantage, there's no expectation, negative or positive.
And early markets, as you're saying, a lot of the 20 to 1 chances should be 50 and 60 to 1 or finish up that sort of price. Whereas, because so many people look at races these days, it's very hard to find 20 to 1 chances that are 3 or 4 to 1 chances, whereas before it was a lot easier. There were a lot more holes in the market.
Different story. But
now access to so many things, like I've found a couple in the last 2 weeks that have run second just to annoy the tri-paddy, but they're not easy to come about. The prices don't hold up, and it's bad for me because I'm the classic like this like Mick. There's nothing better than finding a 20 to 1 winner that you think's a moral by somehow, like you can justify it to yourself as long as you can, and they pop up every few months, but you're nearly better off, as Paul said, taking it gospel and coming down into the public market and concentrating on that area and trying to find holes, because so much of the work's already done, and it's just
the market itself is a weakness insofar as it doesn't price the horses correctly, because if it priced those horses that start 2 to 1, 3 to 1, 6 to 4, whatever it might be, correctly, then the loss on turnover that you would experience as a punter would roughly equalise what the long-term average is.
Yes.
And it doesn't. which means they're not getting it right.
No, but they're not getting the spread right in that shorter market, but they're getting the right horses in there.
Yes.
So the reality is that the 20-1 winner's extremely hard to find now, unless there's a significant bias, a significant pace difference, something strange happens in the race to throw up a strange result. That's more when something wins at 20-1 now than simply on form.
Yeah, and if you're going to have, if you're going to say bet to collect 4% of your bank and you've got something marked at, say $10 in the market, on your market, then you're having, 0.4% on it, irrespective of whether it's 10-1 or 50-1. You're still having the same bet if that's the way you're betting. And obviously, if you do get the result and you are right, then you'll be rewarded.
Yes.
For that. So, but my suggestion would be, from my point of view,
tidy up your staking a bit.
You've got to be consistent in whatever you're doing. If you don't rate them as well as you think you should be, then I would suggest that, and looking at a couple of these examples, rated $6 SP20, rated $4 SP11, rated
well, see, the bottom
SP6.
two for me automatically points out the issue. Say
he's got an issue in his pricing.
Well, you've got it rated $6. Oh, hang on, yeah, and he's had 250 on it rated. So the gap, so it's 3 times the price. So he's obviously not doing it on overlay, but you could do it on price. So, but then he's had more than double the bet on a horse. Right, there's actually no consistency.
Look, I won't get into the consistency.
No. So, but yeah, the staking is definitely an issue to attack.
Even without the staking, Mick, if you're pricing things $6, they're SP 20, $3 SP6, rated 4 SP 11, you're wrong in your pricing. You can't be that right. Everyone wants to think, oh, gee, I rated that at $4 and it won at $20.
Yes.
That's terrific if it ever happens. And I'm not saying it can't happen, but it's very unlikely to happen.
Yes.
If you're consistently getting those
and if you can get it right, but you've got to go back and check why you were right. Yeah. You've got to make sure you were right.
You've got to make sure you're right.
Yes.
You can't be that far out from the closing market and expect to have an edge in terms of your
Well, it's possible, say you find a 20-1 winner, you mark it $4, you're a genius.
Yeah, of course.
You go back and you reprice the race like a lot of people do, and you could easily price that horse 10 or 12 to 1. Like if you no ego involved, you're going back and you're saying, well, this fell into place for it to win.
Yep.
I was wrong. I've got away with it.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So you've always got to be checking your own pricing, even when you're right. It's so easy to, as you say, sort of throw it up on Twitter. I had priced that at $4 when it was 20s, but you can still be wrong. You can collect but be wrong.
Exactly. You can be right insofar as the result.
Yes.
But you're wrong in terms of the fundamental, because if your markets are that disproportionate to what the closing betting market offers, then there is a problem in your pricing model. The market will beat you over time if that's the case.
Yes.
But then the easy solution, of course, is to accept the market price and work from there and work on learning the skills to price it correctly.
Yes.
It could be the distribution that you're applying in your markets. You have too much emphasis towards the longer priced horses, so you're shortening those and you're not making your favourites short enough, or you're making your favourites too short and your longer priced ones too long. So whatever the case is, Mick, you need to have a look at that and seriously look at the consistency that you apply to it. Okay, second last question for this week. This is from Matt. I watched your weekly review this morning and you mentioned to fire any questions for you and Paul. I'm interested in knowing a little bit more about what is meant by verified times, and also generally how do you go about checking the time of a race, i.e. clocking it yourself off a replay. Any insight would be appreciated. Okay, Matt, I outsource all of the time verification in terms of overall time and sectionals to a private organisation that look after a number of the elite professionals. It's not widely publicised or available.
It's not cheap.
It costs an absolute fortune, I can assure you. And you've got to decide as a punter, I suppose, if you're going to be able to benefit from that, if you were to subscribe to that type of data yourself, or whether you're better off taking our service and relying on the fact that we've already put in the science. We merge that science with the numbers, and the numbers give us the result.
Yeah, so through Paul's system, you don't get a raw time, but you get a
time rating.
Yes, a time rating.
So which is the only thing that makes sense, because the times themselves are useless once the race day is complete. Because even if you've got, say, Rosehill Good 3 track, 70 seconds, 1,200 metres, what do you do with that next week when you've got Rosehill Good track and you've got 69.5 seconds. Is the 69.5 better, or is the 70 better? Well, the answer depends on how the track played on the day.
Yeah, rail positions, anything, yeah.
A lot of different factors, and so you need to apply that track speed alteration, or some people call it variant, to adjust those races and either raise them or lower them accordingly. So the times themselves allow you to compare between heats on a day, but going forward, being able to take that horse's rating or performance and assess it against a horse from a different rating out of a different race at another track is impossible just on the times alone.
Yes.
So that's why we convert it all to a rating, because it's the only thing that makes sense long term. In terms of software that you use to actually do this, they use specialist software that they've had constructed for them that allow them to verify the times more accurately. You will always get a better time off lateral vision, or what's known as lateral vision, which is essentially the side-on shot, than you will off some of the shots that you get from commercial TV. So if you've got access to lateral vision, or if you're lucky enough or fortunate enough to have that, steward's vision, etc., you can obviously get a lot better reading. The reason why we verify times, well, it's simple. Most of them are wrong. Most of the official times and sectionals are wrong by varying degrees, and some of them are astoundingly wrong. I mean, they're massissive. You know, John, they can
10,
be
12 lengths.
They can be 10 and 12 lengths out.
2 seconds, like it's
In some of these country tracks, they're abysmal. Metropolitan tracks still have problems. Don't think that they're right. They're certainly more right.
And they're spending. They're aware of the issue.
They're aware of the issue, and they're making investments into things like, in Sydney the Longines system, Melbourne the tracker system. But if we look at the tracker system for a minute and think about how good it is in, say, Hong Kong, the Cox Plate, the premier race, weight for age race in Australia, was won by Winx. If you go to racing.com and actually have a look at the individual splits and add them together, they're 2.73 seconds out, so about 18 lengths out. So how good is the tracker system in Australia? There's obviously some issues there. Yeah. So you need to think about that. If you're getting it for nothing, there's a reason why it's available free of charge. The Hong Kong times that are published and available publicly at no cost, they're pretty good. They're not too far off being right. We still get those verified. We still pick up discrepancies, but they're actually pretty good overall. So. Mick, I hope that, Matt, I should say, I hope that answers your question.
The only time you basically clock a time yourself, or you're running in an unverified time, is during the day, I think, like actually during a race meeting, where you might plug in a time that's been given, like an unofficial or standard time from the racetrack, or you can clock it yourself off a replay. That's not too difficult to do, and that will give you a bit of an advantage on sort of track conditions, I guess.
We use the verified track condition tool in Access. So during the case of a day where I'm betting on a meeting, I'll actually take note of the official time and sectional. I'll key that in. The computer will tell me whether the track condition's accurate or not. It will also tell me how the race was run in terms of a sectional breakdown, first and last section. So I get an important feel as to what the pace shape was in the race, which can help identify bias.
Any bias,
if we're seeing slow early pace, sprint home and horses storming down the middle, we could have a situation where the inside's no good.
Absolutely.
Depending on the race and the distance and whatnot.
So that's the only time you'd use unverified times to do form, basically.
And in results too, we use the unverified times or the official times to produce results, because we do result every day.
Yes.
And then as the times filter through, they're updated, and there's notification posted on the system, so anyone using our software will know when the actual times are verified or not.
So I do reviews every week, often there on a Sunday, so obviously verified time's not through. Correct. I'm doing off standard times,
Now, there was a race that was run at Rosehill Saturday, won by Minari, that we thought we might dig down into, John, and sort of expose this race for what it was.
I just thought it was the first race that it was actually a gateway race to a lot of races this spring. There's a few 3-year-olds that was obviously important, returning 3-year-olds this time of year. It was their first little key lead-up race that'll head towards Golden Roses, key sprint races. I think Minari talked about the Everest. That was the sort of first gateway race where we saw some exposed 3-year-olds coming back from their 2-year-old preparation. So it was just an interesting race that to talk about, I thought.
So we might just break this down into two parts. I'll talk briefly about the times and the sectional analysis, and we're using still official times at this stage to talk about this. And then, John, you might sort of talk about maybe the horses, the video analysis side of it, and what you saw.
Sounds good.
Okay, so in terms of the times, they ran 5 lengths over the track par, which was impressive. They went 3 lengths on the typical listed race. Now, that's a very good performance for a 3-year-old horse. So we're talking about comparing it to what the typical open age horse would do in a listed race at Rose Hill on a Saturday. In terms of the benchmark 94 that day, which was run over the same distance, won by Badajoz, it went 5 lengths better than that. So that was a great reference, you know, when comparing the 2 races, the 3-year-old against, in a listed race, against the open age benchmark 94, which is pretty much close.
And is that it was obviously a little bit slower tempo in the 95, so have you adjusted for that?
Yeah, we've adjusted for that.
Okay, so that's even better.
Minari went about 3 lengths above, should I say the race leader went about 3 lengths above to the 600 metres, and they came home at about par time. So, you know, obviously there was a little bit of pacing.
Fast tempo, but solid, yeah.
Solid sectional through the line. Assuming those times are right, from my point of view, a times point of view, Minari certainly has a lot of X factor written in his profile and has the capability of going forward. It'll be interesting to see where they go. John, what do you think?
Yeah, so well, the other point about Minari, and I've obviously got a little bit more inside information to the horse, if you want to call it that, because I talked to Josh who rode it, and he was a little bit concerned going out, not that in the horse, but in that he sort of fell apart a bit from a fitness perspective, like he started to sweat and show a bit of signs that he may not have been near his peak. So that's an even better performance from that point of view, that he will take great benefit, you would imagine, from this run. 1100 first up. Obviously the fence looked pretty good to me there too, so he was one of the few horses to make ground through the outside of the track. He picked them up really quickly. You know, he's done everything you would expect a good horse to do. There weren't too many excuses for the other horses, which was important. Obviously Trekking kind of got held up a bit in behind, but had his chance, and he was a bit weak on Minari's stronger than him on the line. The second horse has got 1400 metre form. It's led in the best part, and he's run past him. So
what about outperformance? I mean, I thought there was a lot of merit in that. That horse coming back to 1100.
Siege Quebec, yes. So
being able to do what it did and being as competitive as it was, I thought it would put up a great effort.
Very uncharacteristic. Obviously, from the stable, you expect him to show speed. He's led both his starts in a 1250 maiden and then a 1400 metre benchmark race. So to put it into perspective, like it is much easier to lead a 1250 maiden. Like it's a lot. It's maybe 10 lengths easier to lead a 1250 maiden at a provincial than it is an 1100 metre 3-year-old listed race. So he's had to put more effort into doing that. He's obviously had to come back in distance, and then he's only been beaten by one horse in the race who's done a pretty exceptional job. So he to me, I've never seen really Gay go 1250 14 back to 11. I understand that they were desperate to win the race, but I think they'd be very happy with the performance, and that horse is much more likely to step back up in distance significantly, whether it be a Golden Rose.
And could really do something.
Absolutely. It's a horse that seems to be not underplayed. It's always starts hard in the market, but it's a horse that has genuine scope to be. I would expect it to go to a Golden Rose and then go even further to say as a spring champion or something like that. Whereas Minari is a horse that looks like Gerald's talked in the media that he's talking Everest. He's Everest, and how he gets there, whether he goes San Domenico, whether he just goes run to the Rose, Golden Rose back to an Everest, whether he goes San Domenico to another sprint race if he doesn't get an Everest start. But he looks a serious horse. When we're talking sprinters and the races that they're attacking this year, it's such a different vibe with this Everest in play. You've got the key weight for age, basically sprinters of your what's the horse? The Gazelle English, Fell Swoop, Chautauqua, all looking like they're targeting the one race, which is understandable. It's worth $12 million or $6 million to the winner. Yeah. But the second tier of horses, so I'm not talking second tier, but they haven't got to start in the race. Minaris, your Spieths, who are looking to get into that race and target this big, they've got to have fallbacks as well.
And what other 3-year-olds are there right now?
Well, that you can take. So, like, I'm really interested in, say, a horse like Pariah, who had similar form in its first preparations, trialled really well, great stable. It looks a similar profile of horse, but there's got to be some 3-year-olds pop up because there's no. Sorry, guys. I think we were talking about the other sprinters. So the sprinters returning. We're talking like 3-year-olds versus more experienced campaigners, and there was a race at Melbourne the other day, which is I think basically their lead-off sprint. Lankan Rupee, who's struggled a bit in recent times. He got his wet track the other day. He was first up, raced away, beaten by a horse called Ability. I think
good
impressive.
To see him come back though.
Yeah, I haven't looked at that race in detail, but to me that's not A1 Group 1 form. To me, I can't see that being super strong sprint form. So there's a gap there that basically needs to be filled by these promising 3-year-olds coming through.
If you look at the line drawn through, say, a horse like Star Turn and what it did last year, in its lead up, that sort of all goes well for Minari.
I saw Dominic Byrne put something up, and that was similar. He was trying to say that a horse returning at this time can easily be peaking for a race like the Everest, even though it does look a bit further down the line. Star Turn went to Melbourne and won a similar, was it a Group 1 sprint? I'm not sure. It won a big sprint around the same time, and I think that was his direct comparison because Star Turn won the Run to the Rose, which was run in place of this Rosebud last year. So same day, similar performance on times, I think he's trying to say. So Minari can get to that sort of level. So it's just a very interesting landscape for sprinters because you've got the races like the Lightning Stakes, the Manikato, that are going to be run around the same time as the Everest, which could be weakened drastically due to the Everest. So
the quality of those races, we could see some perhaps low rating editions of those events this year, depending on who goes where.
Exactly, and these horses, which are basically all targeting the Golden Rose, because it's another big stallion making high prize money race, could easily back off into these Lightning handicaps, Manikato. So these 3-year-olds are going to be so important this year because there's a lack of high-class sprinters around, and the ones that are around have already been claimed or are looking to go towards the Everest. So keep a really close eye on these 3-year-old races, Sydney, Melbourne, Brisbane, everywhere, because they're going to be important in the next couple of months. And I think this race looks like it's going to be strong. The first two across the line look extremely talented prospects, and Trekking just didn't come back, develop as into a big strong colt. So he's a bit of an issue, I think, from a physical point, that he might be found out at the top grade. And there's a couple of other horses in there behind that will probably can be suited back in grade, but the Minari and Siege of Quebec, definitely the two that can go on to be dangerous over the spring.
So the warning, I suppose, is that don't always look at the headline class of what the race might be.
Yes.
Because we could see some situations where we might have Group 2s, Group 1s that aren't genuine Group 2s, Group 1s.
Yes.
And obviously rate lower than what they have previously or what traditionally they do, the benchmark that they might rate to. Obviously, we'll pick that up through our rating process, and that will be distributed accordingly back to clients.
Well, it's a dead set spanner in the works. It's a race that's never existed before, so it's changing programming for all sorts of horses, north-south, that are trying to get into this race. I know David Hayes has got a spot. It'll be interesting, and just because there aren't too many sprinters around,
all we need is a wet track at Randwick.
No comment. We don't want that.
Okay, punters, that's the end of part 2 for episode number 3. Thanks for your questions. If you'd like to follow us on Twitter, please do, @TPAOZ. And if you want to email questions for discussion in future episodes, please do so and email paul@thepuntersacademy.com.au. Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Cheers.